Okay, so our topic for this evening, as you know, is boosting the brain. Boosting the brain, how far should we go? Recently we've seen several huge new brain research projects launched in various parts of the world. The European Human Brain Project, we've seen President Obama's $1 billion brain initiative in the USA. We've seen the Human Connectome project, which aims to provide a complete neuronal wiring diagram of the whole of the brain, and there are others as well. I noticed only a few months ago a paper was published where a research team had managed to generate in vitro in the laboratory a very small piece of growing brain for differentiating brain cells, starting out from brain cells. So there's a huge explosion of interest, explosion of information being gathered about the brain, and over this century there's absolutely no doubt at all that this is going to bring the most ethical issues, I think, into the public sphere. And the question, of course, is what are we going to do with all this information? How far are we going to go in utilizing it to boost the brain's capacities or not, and so on and so forth. And that's the topic we have here. For this evening, we have a very distinguished panel who are going to help us explore this topic together. I'm going to introduce them now from my left to my right. So on my far left, we have Professor Raymond Tallis, who is the former Professor of Geriatric Medicine at Manchester University. He's a prolific writer and broadcaster, indeed a polymath, who writes novels, poetry, and plays in his spare time. In addition, he's written 23 books on the philosophy of mind, philosophical anthropology, literary theory, the nature of art, and cultural criticism, and still has time to be with us here this evening. Coming along, and then on my immediate left is Dr. Alasdair, Senior Lecturer in Neurology in the Department of Medicine here in Cambridge. His primary research interest is in the immunology and treatment of multiple sclerosis. In 2009, Dr. Coles was ordained priest in the Church of England, and besides running a very active research group, a productive research group at Emirates Hospital, is also there on the chaplaincy team. A few weeks ago, Dr. Coles was running a workshop here on the question of neuroscience and religion. Media writers Professor Barbara Sahakian, who is Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology in Cambridge, President of the British Association for Psychopharmacology, and her research is aimed at understanding the neural basis of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral dysfunction in order to develop more effective pharmacological and psychological treatments. And the focus of Professor Sahakian's research is on early detection, differential diagnosis, and proof of concept studies using cognitive enhancing drugs. And then on my far right is Dr. Pete Moore, writer, journalist, and broadcaster who started life in full-time science research and then switched to full-time writing. And Dr. Moore has published an extensive range of books on popular science and the ethics of the applications of science. Perhaps most relevant for our topic this evening is his book entitled Enhancing Me, the Hope and Hype of Human Enhancement. And that reminds me to say that most of our panelists here this evening have their own books on the bookstall at the back. Here's one, The Bad News, Enhancing Me, Aping Mankind, Reflections of a Metaphysical Unearthed. I'll explain to you what that means. And you're very welcome to stay for free drinks at the back afterwards at the entrance in the room, straight up the stairs, and browse on the bookstall, and I'm sure the authors will be delighted to sign copies of their books. So without more ado, to get the ball rolling this evening, I again call upon Ray Tallis to give us a brief introduction to his thoughts on this topic. Thank you very much, Ray. Over to you.
Dennis, thank you, Ashley. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for having me back. And in a sense, I may be accused in gratitude because I'm going to start by looking critically at some of the assumptions I think that are behind our panel discussion. I'm sure my fellow panelists will then look critically at my critical look at the assumptions. Well, the first assumption is that we now have, or surely going to have, brand new methods of improving brain power that are much more effective than anything we've previously had available. These will have resulted, or will result, from the kind of spectacular advances in brain sciences that are anticipated. The advances in brain science will continue without limit. Soon we may have brain boosters beyond our wildest dreams. Assumption one. Assumption two is that these may have various adverse effects, so we should be worried. Some of these effects may be direct. We might burn out our brains. If we don't exactly burn our brains out, we might damage them more subtly in the long term through booster abuse. the artificial cognitive paradoxes into which we propel ourselves will exact their control. More subtly, we shall give certain aspects of brain function, or more speculatively, mind function, or more speculatively still, character function, an emphasis, evaluation that marginalizes other equally important capacities. In the pop jargon, we shall become hypercognitive geeks. Second assumption. Thirdly, are assumptions that we should be concerned about equity. Those who have access to brain boosters will have an unfair advantage over those who do not. In a sense, brain boosting is cheating. Don't call me a party pooper, but I have to say I'm not too sure whether any of these assumptions stands up terribly well to close scrutiny. So let me make some preliminary, very unhelpful remarks. First of all, what's new? The history of humankind is in a sense the history of brain boosting, by teaching, formal education, by use of artifacts, by rituals, and by various nostrums, and so on. Barbara will be in a particularly strong position to tell us what's really new, whether we're talking about differences in kind, or even differences in degree, compared to the past, when colourine, marching powder, amphetamines, and so on were freely available. The notions of drugs or techniques that operate directly on the brain as game changers have been around a long time, and the game has rather stubbornly refused to be changed. Remember Prozac Nation 20 years ago? Soul boosters that would solve all our social problems and make us better and well? Think about the claims about brain-boosting foods, omega-3, antioxidants, and other terms of rhetoric. And mind-training games that seem very much less robust than the obvious fact that, for example, starvation impairs cognitive function. Do we really think modafinil, Ritalin, and various other entities are all that fundamentally different? Now, as for adverse effects, it would be difficult to beat everyone's favourite psychoactive drug, alcohol, or more specialist but widely available preparations such as cannabis or cocaine for long-term damage after short-term gains. Whether the more complex effect of leading to a hypercognitive world, whether this will happen and whether it's important, is difficult to say. According to some writers, this has been happening for several millennia. Even if you don't accept Ian McGilchrist's thesis in The Master and His Emissary, that the left hemisphere has taken over civilization, marginalizing the right hemisphere, and I don't accept it, but one does have to recognize in a digital world we are more narrowly intellectual than in previous eras. The horny-handed sons of analog toil are now regarded as second-class citizens, and most of us spend much of our time dealing with abstraction. The independent contribution of brain boosters to this cultural shift will, I suspect, be negatively small. And finally, the assumption about the threat to social justice. Well, there's already huge inequality in the availability of brain boosting to different people in different parts of the world. For many, elementary brain care, dinner, for example, is not available. And it's not merely Chavist to observe that many are brought up in environments that are hardly conducive to intellectual development. And finally, brain-boosting drugs, if they really were any good in the long term and really had meaningful effects on life chances, rather than producing transient changes, perhaps magnified because I examined in the laboratory, these drugs will be much cheaper than going to a crammer or paying for fees for a top school that sends its pupils to Oxford or second best, Cambridge. So in a sense, they might be seen, if they're any good, these drugs, to be egalitarian. A public school in a pill. What's wrong with that? So my question, therefore, is whether or not the issue we're addressing is as big as it is sometimes thought to be. You may think I have an ulterior motive in preempting the discussion, namely a desire to get to the bar and the psychoactive substances obeyed therein. You may think that. I couldn't possibly comment.
If I just say to people who came in later and might be sitting uncomfortably somewhere, if you go around the back and sort of carry on up, I think you can pop out the top and then maybe work your way. There are chairs around there if you prefer a chair. Thanks very much. Over to people. Thank you. That's fine. Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, my left. Getting my left, my right. Upstairs. Please,
Perhaps, Dennis, it will be helpful to you that there'll be a video of you afterwards that you can consult if you fail to recollect any of the answer. So, boosting the brain, how far should we go? How far would we go? So, when people have a brain disease, they deserve as much compassion as we can give them in the form of right treatment. I'm sure we'd all agree with that. What about those with healthy brains And what about those with brains which are healthy, which we choose to make sick? So let's take the case example of modafinil, about which Barbara has written much. Modafinil is a drug that's available appropriately for the treatment of people with certain sleep disorders and fatigue, such as in multiple sclerosis, which is a disease that I spent a lot of time dealing with. It's a drug that helps people whose brains are damaged by allowing some return of normal cognition, normal attention, and to some extent normal intelligence in the broadest sense. Now, as Barbara has shown, about 17 or 18% of US students take modafinil. They are healthy people who are taking this drug to allow them to work longer into the night so that they can absorb more and get better results in their exams. Is that right? So I want to say it is definitely wrong for two reasons. Firstly, that is cheating. It's cheating in the Lance Armstrong sense, and I think that is a real thing, Ray, which you dismiss at your peril, that sense of natural justice. But it is also cheating, I think, for the individual themselves, because by trying to take a shortcut to the development of virtuous character, they're denying themselves a fulfilled and contented life, coming to acceptance of their limitations. Those are important concepts for the development of a virtuous character. So firstly, it's wrong because it's cheating. Secondly, it's wrong because it leads to medicalisation of normal behaviour, and worse, to oppression of groups of people through medicalisation. So what do I mean by that? Well, modafinil is widely used in the armed forces around the world to keep, for instance, Indian Air Force pilots awake, or British Special Forces awake, or the entire Foreign Legion awake, or indeed the ambulance service in California at times of supposed natural disasters. Modafinil is freely given to all of those people going about their regular work. You may think that's appropriate, but do you think it is appropriate that ordinary, honest shift workers in the United Kingdom are given modafinil to keep them working? So you and I have agreed to the diagnosis of shift worker syndrome, for which NICE has agreed we should give modafinil. These are healthy people with healthy brains at the start of this oppressive work regime, who you and I are consenting to receiving modafinil to keep them awake and working. Now that, I submit, is absolutely wrong. And we've allowed that to happen because we've allowed the margins between what is healthy and what is diseased to be blurred. And it's only by saying firmly that the healthy brain does not need boosting that we can police those margins. So no, we should take boosting the brain no further.
Thank you, Barbara, with you.
So I'm going to try to find out what kind of audience we're dealing with here. So how many of you boost your brain and keep yourselves awake and alert with caffeine and nicotine? So who's drinking a lot of coffee and smoking cigarettes? There we go. Okay. So we regard that as acceptable. Now, I was actually doing a study with Lord Alasdair, who's the head of surgery at Imperial College in London, and he wanted me to look at modafinil with him and sleep-deprived doctors, because his surgeons were taking a lot of caffeine to stay awake and alert during long operations, possibly at night. And of course, with a lot of caffeine, you tend to get tremors. Some of you will know who have been coffee drinkers for a long time and drink quite a lot. So he was wondering, is there a better cognitive enhancing drug? with less side effects, that would be safer for operations and things like that. And we actually looked at modafinil in sleep-deprived doctors, and we found that it reduced their impulsive behavior compared to people who took placebo and were sleep-deprived. And it also made them more cognitively flexible in their problem solving. So if they didn't get the solution the first time and had to think of another solution, they were very quick to switch. So there's a benefit that we can see. And we were hearing from Alasdair, who quite rightly said these drugs are incredibly important for patient groups, and I think most of us would agree that we need to find even more effective cognitive enhancing drugs for patients. But of course, we always have to look at risk-benefit analysis when we're considering invasive treatments like drugs. And in the case of patients, of course, the argument is very clear. For healthy people, of course, it becomes less so. But Alasdair also mentioned the fact that the FDA has approved modafinil for sleep disturbance due to shift work. And one reason they did that was it reduced accidents in shift workers. Well, perhaps that's a good thing. I was working with the Joint Academies report on looking at human enhancement in the workplace. And we were discussing the fact that some bus drivers have been driving children back to the UK overnight and fallen asleep. And unfortunately, there's been crashes and children have died. Wouldn't it be a good thing if we could keep people awake and alert while doing their normal work, as long as the side effects were minimized? So I'll ask you another question. Now, part of the problem, of course, at the moment is that we haven't got the long-term safety studies, importantly, but also efficacy studies in healthy people with drugs such as modafinil. But suppose we had a safe, effective, cognitive enhancing drug. How many people in the audience would take it? Okay, that's very interesting. And it'll be fun to find out later why you would take it and also why you might not want to take it. So I think this is going to make a very good discussion and debate later on. Well, the interesting thing is, of course, that we are developing new drugs, and we do have to think about our brain health. Two of the biggest challenges that the UK government has at the moment is Alzheimer's disease, because we have the aging population, and with age, age is a big risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So we need to find better, new, effective treatments for Alzheimer's disease. And I worked on some of the current ones that we have, the cholinesterase inhibitors, drugs like Aricept and donepezil, but we need even better drugs than those. And the other challenge that they had, of course, was days lost at work to depression. Because when people are depressed, they have cognitive problems, they can't concentrate, they can't attend, they can't plan. And this is quite debilitating in the workplace. So another concept is how will we help people with depression? Now, it's very easy with certain disorders to think of it as dichotomous. At one end you're seriously ill and at the other end you're not. But a lot of problems that people have are more spectrum oriented. So let's take attention, for example. So we know that at extreme ends of the spectrum, we can diagnose attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children and adults. But what about other people going down in the spectrum towards the sort of range where people's attention and concentration is very good? Well, we also know that these drugs, from some of the studies I've done and other people have done, will actually boost and enhance sustained attention in healthy people. And these drugs are acting in the brain in the same way. So that's a very interesting concept. So suppose you're traveling abroad and you've got jet lag, and you have to do an important meeting. Suppose you're the Prime Minister. Would we want these people to be taking these drugs? Would we want them to be awake and alert and be focusing and maybe be able to plan and problem solve better? So I think we have to think about the range of people where it might be an advantage for people to take that. Now, we've heard about the problems such as coercion. So I frequently, when I talk to students, I hear students say to me, well, I don't want to take these drugs like Ritalin or Adderall or but I see that other students are taking them. And obviously, they feel that they're at an unfair advantage, these students who are taking these cognitive enhancing drugs. So I think we have to be concerned about issues such as coercion and also competition for places, you know, because it is unfair to some extent if some people are getting on better because they're taking these drugs. But there are other ways people enhance themselves, and I think we need to think about those. So for instance, exercise can increase neurogenesis in your brain, and particularly in the hippocampus. So why aren't we as a society, you know, doing more jogging, doing more exercise? Lifelong learning, another excellent way to boost your cognition. Why are we as a society looking for a quick fix? And I think we need to think about issues like that as well. So I'll basically wrap it up, but what I would like to argue is the continuum between normal and being affected and having impaired function sometimes is not that great in patients compared to healthy people. And sometimes these drugs will boost both. And there may be circumstances that we heard about, say, in medical doctors working at night or in the military, where we would like to use these drugs in healthy people. So I think it's an important issue. And so I look forward to further discussion from the audience. Thank you.
Just on the question, by the way, that Barbara asked the audience, because you can't see the rest of the audience, I can. Roughly, I would say, in response to how many people would take safe cognitively enhancing drugs if available, I guess about 50% of the audience put their hand up. I think something like that. Over to you, Pete. Thank you.
Thank you. Boosting the brain, how far should we go? I'd say as far as we can. Safely. And that's the problem, isn't it? When you put those two together. I mean, we do everything we can to boost our brain as fast as we can. I've got 3 kids, we moved house, we put them ourselves next to a decent school, we check on their homework, we kick them around, we cancel sweets. We do things to help them to boost their brain. Parents spend a fortune on coaching, if they've got the fortune to spend. We do lots of things which are unfair, and this is a city that's full of it. And you thrive on it. And that selection is what it's about. And is that problematic? Well, it might be problematic, it might not. That's another story. But boosting the brain is what humans have always done and will always do. And it's what sets us apart, because we can do it deliberately. Safely. That's where it becomes more problematic. And the complexity involved is difficult. Rather than talking, we heard, you know, we need a division between healthy and disease. My understanding that doesn't, you know, there is no neat division between the two. You've got a spectrum of people. So when do you start and stop giving a drug that might be useful for disease? And you say, well, that's okay, but in a healthy person we can't. There are some interesting issues with things like modafinil, Ritalin. The benefits to a poor performing person are great. The benefits to a highly performing person are at best marginal. And there's many research papers that say it's non-existent. So the detriments are present across the board though. So in terms of boosting, I'm yet to see something that boosts high performance and moves us into a whole new market of human capability. As a medicinal product, as something which can take someone who's not performing well and move them up, then that's quite good. In terms of keeping ourselves awake for a long period of time, modafinil does it. Yeah. If you look at the military logs, and if you look at the Canadian military logs, and if you look at the court case, the log when the American pilots bombed the Canadian ground forces, quite clear that the pilots were on modafinil, and they most probably would not have done that. They were deeply paranoid. Everything in the voice cockpit log that came out in court showed that the pilots were highly paranoid. Classic modafinil unwanted effect. So it's not a sweet pill that leaves people just boosted. There are many people who take Revd, who say, yeah, I can concentrate, I can focus, but I can't think sideways. And that's a frequently reported thing. So you can focus, you can stay on task, your imagination gets kicked out. Now, is that boosting? Depends on the task. So what we need to be quite careful in doing is asking some quite searching questions of some of the answers. How many American students are taking it? Well, let's search that a little bit. My recollection is that it's how many people have taken it, as opposed to are frequent and persistent users on it. The two will give you very different answers. So there's not enough modafinil produced in the world for the reported usage of it. If you take these figures and run them out, it doesn't work. So there's a lot of speculation as to how much it's doing. In terms of boosting, just to get us back to our subject, if it's going to be something that really is deeply ethically problematic, it's going to move you well beyond your cohort. There's nothing that can do that at the moment. It can marginally increment. Now, we are in a world where a small increment can push you up a grade. Yeah. And that's true. And that we get down to fine-tuning of equity, equality arguments. But in terms of creating a radical new human being, new entity, and that's not on the market at the moment. And I know of no one who seriously thinks it's on the lab bench either at the moment. So we need to keep the conversation, well, we can decide where it goes. It can either go into futurology or reality. And you can have fun in both spaces, but we just need to know. One of the tests there is watch out for words like suppose and if as part of a sentence. I call it ifology. Too many ifs in a sentence. Let's move on quickly.
Well, thank you very much, Tallis, for those brief and nice summaries to get the discussion going. I'm going to give the panel a little bit of time, as mentioned earlier, in case they want to raise points of discussion amongst themselves. Ray, you want to?
I think it's very important when we discuss this to separate matters of fact, and within matters of fact, matters of present fact, and matters of potential future fact, if and suppose. And I don't think we've necessarily kept those separate, but I also feel my reading the situation at the moment is the current facts are fairly moderate advances rather along the lines of what Peter said. And I don't think there's anything distinctively, as it were, morally unacceptable about modafinil than other ways that people use to boost their brain. Which then brings us to questions of ethics. And I think Alasdair came out very strongly that he feels, as it were, they're ethically repugnant, these drugs. But again, I'm not too sure what principle he can mobilise to say that they're more ethically repugnant than all the other ways we use to boost our brain and to boost our life chances. Just because you've had your life chances boosted by 10 years of very expensive education, that doesn't mean to say it's more ethical than a little bit of boost here and there from modafinil, if it did help you. And I found you, for a man of the cloth, quite interesting example, which I think you said was ethical, which is keeping soldiers away, presumably to shoot other people. There's areas where I would feel a bit twitched, but perhaps I'm completely unfairly sure.
Yeah, Ray, you missed that. I wasn't proposing that. I think a core issue where we fundamentally disagree, and from which much of our disagreement emerges, is the nature of what it is to be human. And I sense in Barbara and Peter the view that what it is to be human is to strive to be an Ubermensch in some way. That any striving for improvement or perfection is right and proper. It seems to me that there is a strong legacy of a different view, that to be human is to become aware of our limitations and to strive to be virtuous within those. Now, if you adopt my view, or at least are sympathetic to it, then you'll see that taking a chemical enhancer for a few hours is nothing but a quick fix and isn't promoting the sort of development of contentment with one's limitations, with acceptance of the limited possibilities of one's future and our dependence on those around us and our environment. That is what makes for a good, virtuous life.
I would just like to raise about half a dozen points based on what's been said. And just one more question for the audience. How many of you right now are functioning at your best possible level? You're not sleep deprived, you're not stressed, you haven't got, you're just really at your peak performance.
Looking great.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. So, if you can use a drug that will be safe for you and can actually help you reach that peak performance that we sometimes are lucky enough to actually achieve, wouldn't it be a good thing? Wouldn't we improve in terms of what we could produce? And won't we make many more inventions and be more successful at what we do? Now it's interesting because there is an increasing lifestyle use of these smart drugs, and 90% of modafinil is used off-label. There's been a recent study in Toronto by Roger McIntyre which shows that medical students have been using these drugs, Ritalin and modafinil, quite heavily. And it's interesting because when we've done our studies, which are double-blind, placebo-controlled, we find that Cambridge undergraduates even improve with these drugs like modafinil and Ritalin. And Ritalin sometimes doesn't give an improvement to people who are functioning at a really high level. But so far in our studies, modafinil has improved people or not changed their performance at all.
Okay, let's ask about what do you mean by improve? Could you say what that means?
So for instance, it's not just an attention and concentration, but if we give them a task of planning or problem solving, we can see a better performance. They make fewer errors under the drug, and they score at a higher score. And the Academy of Medical Sciences stated that even a small 10% improvement in a memory score can lead to a higher A-level grade or degree class. So you can understand in a global environment like the one that we have, with various pressures to compete, how this might be very attractive for students. And I think we seriously have to think of as a society, do we want this type of thing, or do we see it as Alasdair does, as something that we should stay away from? Should we embrace it, or should we leave it? Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think I'm closer to Alasdair's position than he probably thinks I am. But let's see where Homo sapiens started out. Probably the biggest thing we learned to do was to light a fire. And then we learned to pop some clothes on. And those two combinations have radically transformed our capability to populate the Earth, because the majority of the Earth is utterly inhospitable and can only be lived in if you can light fires and put clothes on. And those combinations have caused us to grow, to change our abilities, to reach out and to reach on. The problem we're faced with, one of the biggest cognitive advances is glucose. It's a chemical. Darn good. If your brain doesn't have much of it, then we're kind of in trouble. So at what point do we classify a chemical as a nasty drug? And at what point is the food stuff And if you look at most natural foods, they're packed full of curious things. And so I think there's a codifying problem that we're faced with here as to what suddenly becomes an external. A couple of things about the drugs. I mean, things like caffeine. Someone who has been addicted to caffeine, I had to wake up in the night to drink coffee to get back to sleep. I was on 6 or 7 drugs a day. I came off and I shivered for 5 or 6 days in bed sweating. And I'm cautious about caffeine now. And actually I perform at exactly the same level I used to when I was taking those caffeine. You get used to the stuff and you need it in order to perform at normal level. So you feel a little boost in the day, yeah, okay. Doesn't last long, so you have your next one, but actually go cold turkey for 2 weeks and you can save the caffeine bill and you can perform at that caffeine level. There's a sort of macho psycho, let's get a big caffeine fix in so we can get working. Costa Cafe does really well with it, and we do not so well with it actually. With Daffodil, I'm interested to hear those results. To my mind, they're new. I'd also like to see the long-term data in terms of weight loss for people as they use it, dietary dysfunction, depression, and many of the other things that go along with modafinil use that's named. So, yeah, it might do a little bit of boosting, but actually there's quite a lot of evidence that you use it for long. It doesn't do your system much good. Ritalin, close cocaine system, it messes with the way that mitochondria function, and that's quite deep. So back to, I'm not sure there's a clear definition between some types of chemicals, and yet I'm not sure there's a safe one.
One or two more quick comments from the panel, and then we're going to throw it open to the floor. Yes, please, Ray.
I think that's the point. Of course, we care of everyone, whatever level of achievement they have. I mean, and you may think that in a competitive environment, such as Cambridge, people who cannot compete are not cherished, and I think that is a more profound worry that we may have in humanity. But that doesn't mean to say that competition itself is undesirable, and that man, as people has long, and he won't surpass long. Man has endlessly been surpassing his or herself. That we've always been aspiring to bigger and better things. That's why life is much more enjoyable for many people than it was historically. But what I find interesting is, in the sense, the distinction you have between enhancements that are by the sweat of your brow and enhancements that are fairly easy. And that sounds sort of more Calvinistic than a sort of ethical principle. I mean, in the sense that if it hurt and the gain was brought with pain, that's okay. But if it was a tablet, that wasn't okay. The final point is, I am highly sceptical, as I said at the beginning, of the long-term effects of what we got now. And I'm not terribly persuaded that we're going to get things that are fundamentally different from brain science in the future. But Barbara, I would like to press you very hard on these data about the 10% increase in memory made each another a grade level brain. The effects of the daffodil are transient. They indeed are associated with side effects, nausea, etc., and they do wear off in a lot of people. So it would be highly unlikely that 10% would actually genuinely translate into a change in A-level grades. That's a matter of fact rather than mathematics. We can discuss what the ethics are. The area of the curve of the time in which your cognitive functions improve would not actually match the little spikes of improved cognitive activity which you see in the lab and people report from subjectively. Just a few random comments.
Could I just respond to that?
Can you do a quick hand? Because we're going to throw it
Very
open.
quickly. So the 10% improvement in memory score comes from the 2008 Academy of Medical Sciences report. So that's where that data comes from. But it's also very important to remember that a function, a cognitive process called working memory, can be improved with these drugs. And working memory has been shown to be very closely related to fluid intelligence, which is what we call creativity, and also crystallized intelligence, which is what's measured by the What's Adult Intelligence Scale, or perhaps you know it better as an IQ test. So it's very interesting that we can manipulate a function that has a very close relationship to that. The data that I cited on the 10% was from the Academy of Medical Sciences 2008 report on brain sciences, addiction and drugs.
But nobody's done the studies that could do long-term follow-up.
There are no long-term follow-up studies
So
of
they've shown
healthy
long-term
people.
prediction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll obviously come back to revisit. This is a fascinating discussion. But I do want to give the whole audience an opportunity now to please make a brief point if you want. Please don't give us a lecture. There's a lot of people here. We want to allow as many people as possible to ask a question. So if you put your hand up to ask a question, and you can address it to a particular panel member if you like, or just the whole panel. And also, there will be a mic coming around, okay? And the mic, where is it? It's right here. Okay, so we'll start right in the middle. Okay, so thank you, very much.
Thank you. I thought I'd like to ask this question early while I'm functioning at 110%. My name's Chris Berry. I'm a paediatric neurologist that works at Alasdair. We're in Cambridge, so I'm thinking Sid Barrett. And I'm also thinking Jack Kerouac. You know, I'm of a generation where LSD was enhancing the mind, and we can see the long-term side effects of some of that. And we went to see Jack Kerouac on the road recently, and there they all were taking speed, which we now give to children, or at least we give a very similar drug to children who have attention deficit disorder. So I'm worried about this problem of side effects in all of these medications. Now we forget about that in relation to children in a way, because a lot of children in this country who have ADHD get methyl-phenidate or Ritalin or similar type drugs. That's pretty well accepted, and that's happening now, and that's happening in this city. I'm worried about the side effects there, the long-term ones of the drug itself, but also the possible and important side effect that having been given the drug, educationalists and the other people dealing with those children are not dealing with the other issues which are very important. So that's an important side effect, it seems to me. So from my point of view, I'm less interested in using these drugs while we're fit and young and healthy at Cambridge. But if, when I get Alzheimer's, you can boost my brain a bit, I'll be very grateful.
So I think the question, the real issue here is this focus on pharmacology a distraction from really more important things socially that actually could be much more effective? I'd like to hear the panel discussing that a little bit. Anyone would come in? Barbara, would come in?
Yeah, well, as you will know, since you work in this area, for people with severe ADHD, NICE has approved the drug for treatment. It should always be given within a psychosocial context and a psychological treatment. I mean, you're quite right. It shouldn't just be that here's the drug and that's it for you now. There should be psychological treatment given with it. But as you will also know, if you don't treat children with a drug like that when they have severe ADHD, prognosis is very poor. So the dropout rate from school is very high. If you don't stay in school, as you know, you have a terrible outcome in your future life. And also, accidents, substance abuse, and other things are higher if people are not treated. What some people may not know is about 50% or more of people with ADHD as a child still have it as an adult. And we also have an adult clinic at Adams Hospital. And those people could not hold down a job sometimes. Some of them have such severe ADHD, they could not get themselves organized, go into work, and do the job if they were not treated. So these treatments are very important, but they should be within a psychological and psychosocial context.
Any other comments?
I mean, they're often called chemical handcuffs, and there is a big debate. And the biggest risk factor of needing Ritalin is to be male. And boys in schools, we designed an education system where you sit at your desk and you're told to be quiet, right? Go with the Y chromosome, well, possibly doesn't go with any chromosome. And the people who can't cope with that, well, you don't them, then they can cope with it. For another debate, what the heck are we doing with schools? And do we need to change that? And then you might well be able to release some of the people from their handcuffs.
I mean, if we're thinking about people who do not have a diagnosis but are looking to boost their function, it seems to me if you read all the anecdotes about people who use modafinil, essentially it really reinforces your point. To some extent, what Alasdair has been saying, if you take it as a discrete thing, utterly as and focus narrowly on pharmacologically boostable intellectual function, you're clearly missing out on other aspects of education, intellectual growth, etc., etc. And that's where I think, if I had any worries about these pills, apart from the fact that we've been there with amphetamines and so on, it would be that there is this narrow focus. And in fact, people who take modafinil seem to become more solid than they were before they took it, to some extent. Like concentration is almost an aspect of that. So, in a way, I would very much support what you say, that if we focus on pharmacology and think it's fantastic and exaggerate its power, we may overlook the extraordinary power of normal human interactions and all the other aspects of growing up or being a student or whatever. As for my spectrum of Alzheimer's disease, of course, the impact of cholinesterase inhibitors has been very disappointing indeed, well, moderately disappointing anyway, so I would definitely wish we had much more powerful psychoactive drugs in relation to people with dementias.
I have to challenge that, I'm sorry, because cholinesterase inhibitors pay for themselves in the NHS because they keep people out of institutionalized care for a longer period of time. And the expense of that and the distress for people going into institutionalized care is very high. So although they are not an ideal treatment because we want treatments for episodic memory problems, which is one of the key problems, I still think those treatments are very valuable and worthwhile for the people who fortunately are able to take them. And we also need neuroprotective agents that will actually halt the disease process. But I have to disagree with the benefits of that because, as you know, NICE is very strict. And they have certainly approved that drug for the mild and moderate stages of Alzheimer's.
Indeed, I was on the appraisal panel did it, but it just seems to me it doesn't alter the remorse progression of the disease. That's the disappointment, of course, it has something.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. I'm going to take questions on this side, a few of them, okay, because the mic's over here, and then we're going to go over there. So, please, the lady here, thank you. You can keep the mic close to your mouth, that helps everybody.
I had a large mug of tea, so I've got palpitations. I have 2 members of my family who committed suicide on Prozac. I have a husband who had Alzheimer's for 18 years and died last year. And my sense through those dramatic and awful things was that the drug companies were sort of holding sway over what doctors told us and what we learned about what might have helped through a different route. When we approached, for instance, Eli Lilly, who were marketing Prozac at the time, they had massive research coming up against them in the use of Prozac and lots of warning signs, and they were not publishing it. And I think what we have to be very careful about is the power of the drug companies and the money that they make out of promising things. My husband took Aricept for about 3 years and it did him no good at all. And so he gave up on the whole idea of drugs and just tried to have a good time. He did do.
Alasdair.
Well, I mean, thank you, first of all, for sharing those difficult experiences. And we all are sorry for those for you. So you will know, but others may not, that GlaxoSmithKline have made the greatest payout in the history of pharmaceutical legal cases on the basis that they actively prevented research showing that one of their products promoted suicide in adolescents. That was just 2 years ago. And there is a very real danger in that. But there's also another danger, which perhaps you're alluding to, that I want to just make clear, is that pharmaceutical companies, when they come across a psychoactive drug, will invent diseases and make doctors believe in them in order to expand the market. So I personally think that shift worker syndrome is one of those diseases. Another very clear one is female sexual dysfunction syndrome, which was invented by Pfizer when they found that their drug Viagra had certain activities in women. And it is quite clear as a matter of historical record that every single meeting on female sexual dysfunction syndrome after that was funded by Pfizer with the objective of getting that drug license. I make these points to reiterate where I started, which is, unlike my colleagues to my right, I think it is important to control the boundary between what is disease and what is a healthy brain. It's not always easy, but I think it's important to make that distinction.
I'm sorry, very sorry for the experiences that you've had, and it must be dreadful, all that bereavement. But I have to say that, for many people, it's very easy to bash the pharmaceutical industry, and everybody loves to do it. But for many people who have severe depression, certainly the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors can be incredibly important in helping them to normalize. I think what we need to do more of, that we don't do, is think about good brain health all the time and the way we're concerned about our physical health. And I think we need to do that really early on in childhood in terms of nutrition, exercise, education. And we have to be aware of when things are going badly wrong and try to do something about it early, because in those cases frequently psychological treatments are sufficient and drug treatments are not required at that stage. But I have worked with patients as a cognitive behavioral therapist, as a psychologist, where I've had to have them have become more normalized in their behavior and reduce their anxiety with a drug treatment in order to engage them in therapy, because you can't start to discuss something with somebody if they're so nervous and moving around and not focusing on what you're saying. So for many people, these drugs can be important, but I emphasize again that they're usually best used in combination, and they should be used in combination with psychological therapies or cognitive behavioral therapies or cognitive training.
Please, question, yeah?
The phrase, I'm a retired general practitioner, and I retired partly because I couldn't do what I did when I was 23. And there comes a time when your ability to perform, but Alzheimer's is abnormal, but I think I'm normal. So there is a spectrum there, and there comes a time when I might get frustrated with what I can't do, but someone's going to turn to me and say, that's normal, you've got to put up with it. And the other point I'd like to make about modafinil is it sounds as if it's a drug that may well work in certain sense, but the shift worker syndrome is related to the section of light and the circadian rhythms of the body. So are you not in danger of interfering with some very basic rhythms of life when you use a drug? And should it not be regarded as something to be used in very, very special circumstances because you're working against nature?
Drugs are rhythms of life.
Okay, okay, yeah.
That comment's incredibly interesting because it brings up the discussion that we had about continuums and about whether we're enhancing or restoring function with these smart drugs or cognitive enhancing drugs. And as you quite rightly point out, obviously Alzheimer's disease, we know a lot about the neurodegenerative process that takes place when you have Alzheimer's disease. But we also know that with normal aging, cognitive function declines. We're performing at our peak within our 20s. So is that restoration? Are we restoring ourselves back to our normal function that we had when we were in our 20s? Or is that enhancement? So it brings out this very point.
Right. I think it's a very good point, because the whole history of humanity is we've become more and more distant from nature. We have increasingly filled the night with light. We have ignored any of those circadian rhythms we inherited from our ancestors. And we have to, in our current society, which is a 24/7 one, many people will be obliged to work in ways that go against any natural biological rhythms. But of course, so little of what we do is natural anyway. It's very unnatural. We're sitting still, listening to each other, sitting in clothes, being warm in a light which is dark outside. So we are very unnatural creatures. And I think we haven't got a clear idea of how we deal with that distance from nature. And one way of dealing with it, of course, is another distance from nature, which is medication. And when I think about Alasdair, say, talking about the use of modafinil to keep surgeons from falling into the abdominal womb, it does seem to me a little worrying. It would be better to have surgeons' ways of life such that they weren't at risk of falling into the abdominal womb, for example, having reasonable hours. But the fact still remains that we still expect people to work at night, to work in all sorts of non-circadian rhythm hours. And I think it's something we really haven't come to terms with. But there are problems which we often throw a pill at, which really are about the way we order our affairs socially.
Thank you. One up here, and then we're going to go to the other side to the back. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'd like to tackle Alasdair's point or a suggestion that these neuroenhancing drugs are cheating somehow, and his idea that somehow character consists in coming to terms with your natural limitations. It seems to be akin to akin to a notion that it's impious to fly into space or build a rocket because that belongs to God. It strikes me that the drugs which we are discussing this evening don't, magically fill your brain with knowledge. A drug that enables you to stay up late or concentrate better enables you to do what you wanted to do and to acquire knowledge or to perform a work function which is what you simply wanted to develop yourself to do anyway. And that's it seems odd to conceive that as cheating. It's not magic. It's just enabling you to do what you want to do in a more effective way. And that is itself a form of character development.
Yeah. So, it's a very fair question. I stick to my guns though, and my view would be this, that when I discovered that Lance Armstrong had taken those drugs, I felt he had let down himself and the world of cycling, and people like me who hero worshipped him, because I regarded him as someone who had excelled as a human in one extraordinary domain. Now I discover that he only excelled because of the multitude of chemicals that he took. Just bear with me. Now, your argument would be, well, that's fine. That's just fine. Lance Armstrong should be given those medals. He was aspiring to be the fastest cyclist, and he did. And I'm actually just going to let it rest with this question. How many people here, if I may ask the question, seems to be the most way, how many people want to give Lance Armstrong his medals back because they think that he deserves them?
It was against the law.
Not against the law, actually, it was against the rules of the sport. But let's say we change the rules, and with the gentleman here, so that's okay. Would you like, we change the rules tonight, would you give him his medals back? So even the questioner hasn't said yes to that.
I think we allow one. Do you want to come back? I think we need to allow one. Sorry, I'm taking over there, David. And we need to allow the question to come back on that. I think to say, yeah.
I would say in Lance Armstrong's defence that almost all the other riders were also using those in performance-enhancing drugs. So although his worst setup was hypocrisy, his claim was he wasn't taking it. But you're not arguing that he didn't practice very hard on his bike as well. He didn't sort of sleep all day and happen to ride fast because
So here I think is the point. Here's where the analogy is. So he let me down because when I go out on my bike for a few microseconds, I imagine I can be Lance Armstrong. There is, because he has held up for me, or he did, the possibility of what humans can do. That's what he held up for me. And I think this is the nature of the debate. What do we believe the nature of humans to be? Now, I regard humans as precarious, fragile, very limited, and striving to exceed those from their own virtuous flow. And my instincts and intuition are that taking a chemical quick fix does not hold up a flourishing image of what humanity is.
Right. I think the straightforward point is that the time he was taking the drugs, they were actually banned and then given advantage. So just breaking the rules just as much as if, you know, he tampered with the ball in cricket and that sort of stuff. That's very straightforward. I mean, I have to keep, probably, this is not to go out of this room, but I think all sport is utterly futile. So it's not.
Ray definitely does need education.
When we think about, say, succeeding generally in a very broad spectrum where there aren't a straightforward set of rules, then it's very difficult to say, well, modafinil is cheating in the way that Lance Armstrong is cheating. You're in a much more ill-defined situation.
I think this raises a lot of interesting questions. I've been very interested in why there's this increasing lifestyle use of smart drugs by healthy people. And there seems to be three main reasons. One is for the competitive edge. They want to do better in exams than somebody else is doing. The other one is that they want to be the best that they can be. So there's a number of philosophers at Oxford who take these drugs, and they want to get a good day's work in. They want to do a lot of deep thinking, and they want to be the best that they can be. And then the third reason we published on earlier, and that was that it improves task-related motivation. So when you have somebody do a test, and then you say, you know, how much did you enjoy that? Under placebo, well, it's okay, that's not that great. But under modafinil, they enjoyed it a lot. So for tasks that people have been putting off and don't find very pleasurable, they find that these drugs help them get down to doing it, like, you know, studying for exams or doing your taxes or something like that. So it's a very interesting point.
I'm very tempted to make a comment about Oxford philosophy. I really resist that. Okay, so, Peter, you were having
we live in a liberal democracy, and liberal democracies have a basic principle that we don't ban something if we can avoid banning it. You ban something if it starts harming other people. Drugs are banned in sports because they harm other people. You might decide that you want to take EPO or add some of these other things, and you might decide, therefore, to clot your arteries and run all the risks that go with it. But why should your competitors be forced to join in that game of Russian roulette if they're going to race alongside you? So the problem with Lance Armstrong is that he was going against a ban that threatened, if the ban was removed, would threaten the health and life of all competitors in that sport. In a liberal democracy, we say that's not good and introduce bans or whatever to stop it. Not sure how many philosophers there are in Oxford, but I think the term a lot is quite a big term for a small set.
Okay, we're going to have another question now. We're going to go over this side, and gentleman here, and the row in front. Thank you.
My question is mainly addressed, I think, to Dr. Cole, but I have to apologise to Dr. Moore because there will be one it, I think. The question is about helping people in exams. For example, dyslexics in previous generation had to put up with the fact that they couldn't do themselves justice in the exam and get their knowledge out. Nowadays they can have extra time in exams. Now the if there were a drug that could make them be able to finish at the same time as everybody else, is that a different situation? Should we see the extra time as cheating, and would the drug be cheating?
No, I think that's a very clear example where our recognition that this is a distinct disorder, a disease in the wider sense of that word, allows us to be compassionate and use all the tools that we have available to us to allow allow those people to flourish to normal health. So yes. So there's no if. So yes, of course. Whatever needs to be done to allow them to flourish.
I'm not a clinical neuropsychologist. It just seems to me that there is a continuum between people who don't have dyslexia and people who have manifest dyslexia. We have to always dichotomize across the continuum and say this is healthy and this is an illness. So you can see how it would actually be quite difficult to decide in an individual case where there was sufficient dyslexia to justify giving the drug. I think this is one of the problems, really, of what I'm getting debate I'm enjoying a lot, is that we are thinking about boosting people who are otherwise well, but we keep on drifting towards thinking of the uses of drugs for people who have a diagnosis. But we're also aware that diagnoses are not natural kinds, but human and social constructs, often driven, as has been pointed out, by the pharmaceutical industry. So I think that's why all of us, I guess, perhaps I'm alone in this, feel we're on very slippery ground.
So, I mean, Ray, this is the difficulty, but the response to that difficulty is not to say it's just impossible and we'll let all things happen. The response, in my view, the responsible response is to control what is health and what is disease.
Okay, I think we'll...
Up here.
Up the top, right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Denis, entrepreneur. So, if I can ask the audience a question, how many people have got a smartphone, a modern smartphone in their pocket? I don't have. Practically everybody. So, to me, if you allow me to draw a black box around myself and my smartphone, given that it's in my pocket the whole time, it's connected to the internet, this enhances my cognition arguably more than any drug I could take. I can navigate to any position on the planet without having to think about it. I can calculate much faster than I could ever as an unaugmented human. So a lot of things one can do with this in your pocket that you could never do beforehand. And these things used to be in buildings, then rooms, then desktops, then laptops, now pockets, next year on our face, perhaps in our bodies in a few years to come. So when I get to this talk and we're saying enhancing the brain, how far can we go? Well, that becomes a very interesting topic when you include the idea of technological advancements beyond the biological advancements. And again, it brings us back to Alasdair's point. What is it to be human? Is it to accept our non-talents, or is it to strive to grow? And you use the word or. Is it to accept or to strive? I do believe it's possible to accept your non-talents and to strive to improve on the things that you're good at. And that's what I like to do personally. I would say both. I would like to know Alasdair's response to, is it possible to do both? That's really it.
So I'm happy to accept your example. I think it's a very good one. What I would like to do is defend absolutely that humans exist without phones. That it is entirely possible to be a fully fulfilled human without phones. The implication of where you're going, I'm sure this isn't really what, but the implication of where you're going would be to say that it's not possible to be human unless you have a smartphone. And that I absolutely resist.
I emphasise how we've been brain boosting through artifacts since the beginning, and Peter was speaking about cooking food, which improves brain function, and so on and so forth, not cook food. And it seems to me that you put your finger on something, which is that the mind isn't intracranial. We have an extended mind which encompasses our environment, and as someone has often been said, we can be pretty dim because our artifacts are fantastically smart, and that's no surprise to me. The smart artifacts that surround us do indeed boost our brains more than the little bit of a tablet we may take from time to time, and that's why your point is, I think, very germane to our discussion. But we've too narrowly isolated one mode of brain boosting.
Just anyone else come back, or did you want to come back?
Briefly, Alasdair, just to come back briefly on that. You said, you made the point you can be human without a smartphone. You can, absolutely. A lot of people choose to. But how many people choose to? 10 years ago, a lot. Today, Maasai warriors have smartphones in their pockets. The interesting point is that humans, and actually the majority of humans on the planet, choose to have some sort of smartphone. It's just a placeholder for an extracranial technological augmentation. And as technology becomes cheaper and more ubiquitous, more and more people, I believe, will make the choice to enhance themselves in that way.
Yes.
It's an interesting game. The anthropologists work hard on it, but one of the things that signifies being human is to be a tool user, and that tool could be a bit of flint that you've scratched and napped off so that you can scrape a hide or plough a field. It's not a tool. It's a bit smarter than a bit of flint. I'll tell you what, if you drop it, it looks a bit like a bit of flint. So it's a funny old game that part of being human actually is to be a tool user. And it is part of what and who we are. In the same way that the vast majority of the cells inside this frame are bacterial. They're not human DNA, it's bacterial DNA. We're strange symbionts that reach out in ways which are quite difficult to draw tight boundaries at some point. So
your brain's bugged, Peter.
Yeah, my brain's bugged. The other thing, I hate calling these smartphones because it denigrates actually what is inside here. We can laugh about it and say we're a lot clever with this smart pocket. It's a jolly good tool. It's a jolly good tool, but I have much more conversational enjoyment talking to someone else who's got one of these than one of those.
I mean, I think, I guess I'll ask the question another way possibly, which would be, do we want it to be the case that the only image we project of a satisfied, fulfilled human being is one with a phone, or a car, or whatever? Is that really what we're saying? And I would say no, that is wrong. It is possible to be a fulfilled and content human being with all the limitations that that brings. And we don't need to encourage discontent and say that the only way you can be fulfilled is to have this or that, or to take it out.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next question. By the way, I have the best of all possible worlds. I have a smartphone and I keep it switched off. It's so peaceful. It's wonderful. So I can't see it here. So there's one in the middle here, and David, just give it to somebody who had up. Sorry, it's a bit in the blue over there, so I can't. We'll try it, then we'll come back up there.
Sorry, I just want to make one more smartphone comment, because the smartphones are comparatively new, clothes are comparatively old. I would argue that we're perfectly human without clothes. But how many of us don't wear clothes here? I think that's the right analogy.
Okay. There's some hands up here, David. Sorry, we're going to have a bit of a long trek around, so we can get the mic up there. Sorry, we only have one running, roving mic here, but there we go. I think this gentleman.
No, I was just going to say that, so realistically with the way that cognitive enhancements are being made now, they're only going to get better, and they're only going to be better at making people improve their grades. So we're going to have to look at the issue of, when we have a very good cognitive enhancer, what we're going to do about the legality of it. So, let's say you make it illegal for these ethical reasons, Alasdair, as such, that like, we don't want to enhance our brain, but that might lead to another situation, for example, now, where we have many illegal drugs that are manufactured by people who don't know how to make them, and then you get the drug, which has lots more side effects, and then you have, the worst thing, a headline which could say, students take rogue batch of drugs that causes death. So surely the only situation that we have now is to, further the advancement of these cognitive enhancing drugs for the people who have dementia and Alzheimer's, and take the risk that healthy people might take them, but just make them as safe as possible.
I think that's an excellent point, and I have tried to bring forward discussions with the government about the fact that what worries me in particular is the sort of issues that you're raising, which is internet buying of these drugs by young people, where they don't really know what they're getting at all. It could be anything. It could be a toxic substance, it could be a placebo, it could be the active drug, but they don't actually know when they purchase it. So I would have thought that it would be much better for the government to say to a pharmaceutical industry, if you can show that this drug is safe and effective in the long term in healthy people, then you can market it, and then people can go to their doctor and say, is this drug safe for me to take? Or you know, I have high blood pressure, can I still take this drug? Am I taking something else where there'd be a drug-drug interaction? So I certainly agree that we need better, more effective cognitive enhancing drugs for people with neuropsychiatric disorders and brain injury. And that will bring even more increasing lifestyle use of these drugs. And it would be better to have a sort of rational approach to the management of it.
Okay.
I mean, the reason they're off-label is because they're not safe at the moment, and that's a big issue. I mean, the if in it is if there is one that is good and safe. And the conversation we need to have with the government at the moment is to make sure that the message goes out that there is not one that is effective and safe. And people need to be really aware that that combination of effective and safe is not present at the moment. And if you're taking it, you're stupid. Let's stop calling them smart drugs. And let's call them stupid drugs. Because that would be a good message to pass around the community.
What I would like to say is we don't know whether they're safe because we haven't done the studies in long-term and healthy people.
But even the short-term
can I just say
studies
that
are
many
saying
people
they're
take these drugs with no untoward side effects. Now, for anything you take, there will be people who respond badly. But I think to say that these drugs are unsafe is a very dangerous thing because many people are taking them and they might be worried by that comment.
They need to be worried. Very worried.
Well, let's stop that one. I want to throw, I want to do some ethology and futurology and throw a question at the panel right out of left field. It's totally different from any we've had yet, okay, because our time is getting on, but I think this might raise some interesting issues. And so it's the year 2075. We now know exactly the part of the brain where people who are pedophiles, where pedophilic thoughts happen in the brain, and we found out how to put an electrode and plant it into the brain and to suppress those thoughts as soon as they arise, and especially thoughts that might result in actions, illegal actions. So here's a subject A who's a pedophile, who's already had 6 years in prison, been let out now, is on the register, and otherwise could be a useful member of society, and it just seems tragic if they were going to end up in prison again. So I'm also being the devil's advocate here, obviously. And so the law says, well, they can choose, they can have an electrode planted in the brain, and it'll send a signal to a computer in the local police station. As soon as the signal, the pedophilic signal, if you like, that particular portion of the brain gets to the police station, it will signal back suppressive electrode, this inhibitory hormone into that portion of the brain, inhibitory transmitter, and with that in place, they are able to be safe and useful members of society. Is that justified?
No.
Right. Well, we'll see what the panel says. I think I'm just... Right.
In a sense, the way you framed it is you focus on the technology and how exciting things that, trade to the brain and picking up messages from the police station. But of course, this situation is still available already. I mean, people who are fixated pedophiles can be castrated. They can chemically or otherwise. That is still an option in some places. So in a way, the question is not about this new brain technology. It's about the appropriateness of finding, as it were, biological solutions to something seen as a biological problem. And that solution has been around and has been used in certain jurisdictions. But I don't think it's a futurological thing. The only futurological bit is the clever technology, not the ethical framework.
And we have penal structures that take away liberties from people who have or are liable to perform damaging acts on other people. Liberal democracies have their prisons. So that would be a technological version of a restraining system. So if it worked, there's an if. It would possibly be cheaper than running a prison system. So it would go down the penal code. I wonder, I was trying to formulate a sort of a parallel mind game of a banker who's about to make a bad decision. And
Any bank ever made a good decision?
well, maybe it'd be on the lot then. But if we move to a more marginal issue, would we be as comfortable? And it's, you know, there are spikes that you put in your brain that if you've got Parkinson's, they're great. You know, put Parkinson's and deep brain stimulation into Google and watch the videos of people with a sort of knitting needle inserted into their brain. You turn the pacemaker on and their symptoms disappear, turn it off, and they need someone else to turn the pacemaker back on because the symptoms come back so much. You can use them for depression, and you can turn off depression. You could create euphoria with them, depending on where you put them. You've got to remember, you've got a knitting needle in your brain, and it's not very safe. So there's issues around, safety issues around it. But some of these things aren't, you know, potentially not massive from a distance.
Any other comments on this?
Well, Denis, I react badly, negatively to your proposition, because what you're doing there is, as it were, punishing someone for inclinations and thoughts, and it's a fundamental principle, but we don't do that. The second reason I react badly is because I don't believe there is a paedophile centre of the brain. Where this has happened, as you well know, in a legal case with someone with a tumour close to the amygdala, the formulation was that this was someone who was inherently had a paedophilic tendency, and the neurological deficit was the inability to restrain themselves. Now, in that case, removal of the tumour seems an appropriate thing to do because it allowed that individual to recover the capacity to restrain themselves, to defend themselves against their own inclinations. So what I would want to see with your paedophile in the future is a whole series of accommodations to allow themselves to restrain themselves, of which chemistry might be a part, but only a part.
But choosing the chemistry is a bit like, you know, Odysseus tying himself to the mast. So in preemptively saying, I'm going to be tempted by the sirens. So chaps, please tie me to the mast, so whatever temptation comes my way, I simply can't act on my temptation. So the ethical structure of really what Denis is suggesting, or things that happen like hormonal castration, is pretty well the same.
But Ray, the point there is why was he allowed to go to the sirens? So I think a society that was compassionate, caring for Odysseus would have said, no, just don't go.
Except in a way, Odysseus had no choice about the particular trajectory he took. And I guess a paedophile has no choice of being in a world where there are children.
If you read the account, Odysseus quite clearly says, I choose to go to the sirens, to hear the beautiful voice, and I know it will bring my destruction, and this is what I'm going to do. I would say society should say, no, Odysseus, that will bring your destruction, let's keep you away.
Right. Well, I thought that aroused a different interesting discussion. We're certainly, okay, we've got a couple of minutes left, probably time for one question. And maybe somebody's dying here to ask a question. There's one right in the middle, so why don't we go in the middle? So, can you just wait for the mic? Sorry, it has to be picked up with the phone and all that. Thank you. So,
Hi, it's about a 2-minute question. Peter was saying that he doesn't think any drug has been developed that would lead to a kind of new kind of human being, a better new kind of human being, and Alasdair, I thought took a very moral approach to the so-called brain enhancer adapter. I was wondering if I could shift the focus away from mainly talks about pharmaceutical and synthetic drugs to a drug called ayahuasca, which is a drug which gives revelatory experience. I think it's been around for, I mean, it's naturally occurring, so it's probably been used for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. It's found in the Amazon, it's used in shamanistic settings, and also by a Christian tribal cult called Santo Daime. It gives visionary experiences which may include revelation of the crucifixion of Christ, of Mary as the Queen of the Amazon, of the depth of the unfolding ecological crisis, the oppression of large portions of humanity, particularly women, and also very commonly a perception of a dimension that could be called evil or demonic. I wonder, it's now becoming extremely popular globally, lots of people going to South America to take it with shamans and these cults, or importing it back. And I think it's been outlawed in the UK in some way. I wonder what you think to use of that kind of drug, which is obviously going to activate parts of the brain which use in visionary or dreamlike or experience or a death would release the DMT.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
So, I mean, many claims have been made over the years. So when Chris here was taking LSD, it was claimed that he would get revelatory knowledge, super knowledge, and he did. So the question, I think the key question in these contexts is, are those experiences authentic or not? Do they have true spiritual significance or not? And that's a question that religions have grappled with over the millennia. So the Christian response to that, to speak from my tradition, would be to judge the outcome of those revelations. So what do they lead to? So by their fruits do you know them? And the Christian tradition over the years has been very suspicious of spiritual experiences induced by toxins and drugs, because on the whole, they have not led to the sort of virtuous behaviour as determined by the Christian tradition. And so they haven't been regarded as authentic spiritual experiences.
Can I just say, I think commonly this drug produces very different experiences for those compared to people who take LSD, and the intention is often very different going into it. So I think a lot of people, I haven't taken it, so
Have you, Chris? You seem to be the expert. No, that's one we just haven't tried.
But a lot of people come out of it very transformed and committed to a spiritual path. In a way, I think different to psychedelic usage in the 60s. But people that lie with psychosis can create problems.
Any brief comments? We've got a finish in the minutes.
I know nothing of that particular compound. I do have a feeling that Big Pharma is on the search for some way of rescuing its demise at the moment. It's in deep trouble because its patents keep running out, and it needs to find some other way of making money. If this was around and was great and was safe, they'll be working on it big time. So they're not stupid. If there's an easily got chemical, they've got hundreds and hundreds of people out in the forests cooking up leaves and grinding up beetles, looking out for chemicals that they can turn into.
No, it's too much. The experience is way too much for pharmaceutical companies to sell.
If there's something within
the
that,
right thing, that's likely to join.
Okay, I think we're going to draw this one to a close because our time is up. With religious experience sort of at the end of the evening, which is probably quite appropriate. We're about to go up and get some free, what was it, a schooner? Booster? I don't know. But first of all, let's really thank our panel really